is Friday, September the 25th, and this is the Anne Insights channels, and this is my second video on a clinical update. I will post on the website a 2 PDF link you can download. One has a time index of prior videos. If you have certain subject there, you can exactly know where in the video the subject are being discussed, as well as keywords, and if you click on these numbers, it gets you straight to the video and the timestamp. So let's talk about our biweekly update there. This is the clinical insights. So today we're going to talk about long-term damage and what's happening with young people there. So this is a picture of, in yellow is the COVID attacking a cell in the body. So a quick reminder of what we know is the only thing that works right now is masks. And we talk about this in the first video, and social distancing and hand washing. It's been very effective in the Asian countries, and we only have 50% of Americans wearing a mask. We'll talk about more about children in this update. There's some new data just came out. Asymptomatic carriers is around 40 to 50%. Indoor transmission is 20 times more contagious than being outdoor. We'll talk about the virus has mutated and is more contagious. And it's not an issue of age, it's an issue of people having pre-existing condition. The big thing, it has been confirmed over and over again, is that most of the transmissions from super spreading event and super spreading people there. So, you know, it is an issue. The long-term damage of COVID-19 is emerging to be a real concern, and we'll talk more about that. What we don't know yet is how long are the antibody effective, and how long is a vaccine going to be effective, and I'll give an update on that. So please take a look at my video on August the 7th, where I did a deep dive on all the different symptoms of COVID. Let's look at some new data just came out on children there, a ratio, an analysis of 32 studies from 21 countries has just been published in JAMA Network. And it shows that the children who are less than 10 to 14 years old have a 44% lower odds of becoming infected. And I underline the word infected. That means they could still be contagious and spread the virus around. It's for them to get sick. And this gives you some of the ratios there. So depending on the publications there, but that means that the kids have indeed a half a chance of getting infected for the same amount of viral exposure. That doesn't mean that you are protected from being with them, because they could be carriers. Another report from the CDC has come out at the same time. It just came out like 2 days ago. And it shows that what is happening in the US is that initially in the spring, it was the older people that had the disease and that drove the mortality rate. What has happened July and August is the 20 to 29-year-old that are the driver of the new cases. And what they're very concerned, and we're going to see in the South, is that they are the one with a delay that are driving the elderly to be infected and unfortunately driving mortality rate. So what they show, for example, is that if you look in the West, and you can see that population there of the medium age of somebody being exposed and infected with a confirmed case, you know, is slowing going down. So if you look at the visits to the ER, which is usually people who have the 20% of the people having a serious reaction to the virus there, you can see it's pretty constant. What happened in the South is that you have that dip there. That means the younger population, the medium age of people who get infected dropped. It was the young people there, but then they drove the elderly 4 to 5 weeks later to be infected, and therefore they are the one who end up in the emergency rooms. And so I think that it's kind of a confirmation that just came out from the CDC that, you know, the younger population, they may not get very sick or die, but they are spreading population will go back, you know, 4 to 5 weeks later into the emergency room, and unfortunately mortality rate goes back up. So let's talk about the long haulers. The data has continued to come up. There's a group on Facebook called the Survivor Corps. They have over 100,000 members in a period of several weeks. They did a survey that just got published on 1,500 people who responded. Most people have chronic fatigue, and they complain about brain fog is kind of the leading problem there, and exhaustion. They did a phone study showing that 35% of their members had not returned to pre-COVID health after 3 weeks after having been exposed to the disease. A study in Italy showed that 87% of people who had been hospitalized still had symptoms 2 months later, and kind of very similar: fatigue, shortness of breath, joint and chest pain. In Germany, another study showed that 78% had lingering heart problem after 3 months, and we'll talk more about that. and the study just came out of Paris, that there's in that one hospital, they're seeing 30 individuals per week, and it's usually young women, and it's more women than men by a ratio of 4 to 1. That seems to be at higher risk. Another group is called the Body Politic COVID. Sorry, there's a typo there. 19 support group. They have 14,000 people there. And what's interesting about that group is 50% of those people who have all these symptoms were never confirmed with a lab with a PCR test for COVID, because in the early days of the disease, you didn't qualify unless you hadn't met somebody from China, if you remember. It was very restricted there. And if you get the test too early or too late, you don't have, the PCR doesn't detect the viral load. So as a result of that, people are starting setting up clinics. So there's a COVID-19 recovery clinic in New York. And what they show is that for up to 4 to 5 months, people are reporting loss of taste and smell, persistent cough, shortness of breath. And these poor people, they have multiple symptoms there, and they go to the PCP, the primary care providers there, and people don't take them seriously. And so it has been a lot of anxiety and frustration by that group. So let's take a bit of a deeper dive. And again, if you look at my video of August the 21st, I did a deep dive on some of those issues there. There was a study that just came up from Vanderbilt University, and they look at the percent of symptoms that people have. So these are the 292 people that they analyzed who did not get hospitalized. So they had mild to medium symptoms and just, figured they'll just recover from home. And you can see that, but that's basically 2 months, several weeks later there, most of them are still reporting serious symptoms. It's a long list of symptoms there. And overall, 33% had not regained their health after 2 to 3 weeks. These are the mild to medium. These are not the severe people there. And so we don't fully understand what the mechanism is. There's a perception it could be a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system there. We clearly know that the blood cells are not coagulating right, and then we create a lot of the blood clots that creates damages into the heart, the lungs, and all of that. So this is a very interesting study that came out of Canada. It's a startup there, and what they do is that they measure the brain functions. And normally, let's assume you have a nice circle at 100. For all the different functions there. In this case, they took 2 COVID survivors who were complaining of having that brain fog. And what's really scary, if you look at these triangles here, is that they went from 100 to pretty much, they dropped 90% of their functionality in automatic attention, reactive attention, concentration, working memory. They're all complaining of memory recall and concentration. And so there's clearly something going on in having some long-term damage into the brain function. But the magnitude, this is the first time I've seen a quantification of the magnitude of the damage in the brain. Long-term damage, it's been clear that there's arrhythmia and heart failures. And this is a data that if you look at the heart, you have heart muscles. This is what's basically compressing the hearts to eject the blood. And you can see these muscles fiber, coming up here, and then you have the nuclei. This is a healthy one. What happens with COVID is that somehow it gets shredded. It's like putting it into your Cuisinart. I hate to use that word. And it literally, these nice filaments there, that's what's contracting there, it's shredded to pieces. And not only is it shredded to pieces, but when they look at trying to find a nuclei there, it's missing, it's gone, it's damaged. These are permanent damage. And the reason is that this is the heart as well as the brain is one part of the body there that does not regenerate itself. The muscles you have in the heart are the muscles you're born with. So when you have a damage, which is like having a heart attack, it does not regenerate itself. And they have confirmed this by looking at autopsy of people who die and who had complained of heart problems there after COVID. They also did a study in JAMA there looking at the MRI after 2 months and showing that 78% of people who had complaints had some, visible damages into the heart. And so the big concern is that this could be irreversible heart damage. That could basically lead you to congestive heart failures over time there. So we're going to continue to watch this, but this is getting really confirmed that the problem may not be mortality of COVID. The problem is that if you have a 10 to 30% chance of long-term damage, this is what we need to worry about. So another study came out this week showing what happened to the antibody after 60 days. Remember, when we get the vaccine, or if you get infected the first time, you need antibodies so you cannot get reinfected. Or if you have a vaccine, you have an antibody reaction, so it covers you. And what seems to happen is that after 60 days, 58% of people no longer can be tested positive for antibodies. And so they did, it is Vanderbilt Medical Center in Atlanta there, they tested the healthcare personnel who continuously get exposed to the virus, and they look at the antibody at baseline and 60 days later. And so it means that we are underestimating the number of people who've been exposed to the virus, because if we look at antibodies for the seroprevalence test and you do it 3 months later, that person may have been exposed, but they no longer have antibody that we can test. So we don't really have a very good idea of what's going on. It also means that as we're creating this serum plasma, you have very, very short windows to collect the plasma for somebody who has been infected. That means we have less than 60 days to collect the data so there's enough antibody can give to somebody who is in the ICU. So we are learning as we go. So there's this concept of trained immunity. And so we've talked in the past in prior videos about having the innate immunity, which is this macrophage. We'll talk more about that. And then you have the adaptive immunities, which is the antibody that drives the B cells and the T cells. And what they start to be a belief is that the role of the macrophage may be very critical. And the macrophage is part of that innate immunity there. This is a picture of a macrophage. And what it does is that it allows the body to be much more responsive as a first immediate response. So let's talk more about this. So if you look at the BCG, which is the Bacillus calmette-guerin, which is the TB vaccination there, basically in the UAE, they did a booster BCG vaccine, and they have had no case of COVID for 3 months after that. They also have done analysis that this BCG vaccine is basically stimulating the white blood cells that are the predecessor, what's called the progenitors of the one that goes into that are being produced by the bone marrow. And then somehow there's a memory of that boosting there, so that as we continue to replicate these white blood cells, it keeps us protected there. And so as a result, right now, there's several clinical trials in the US, Netherlands, and Australia using the BCG as a ways to boost the innate immune system there. The concept of the trained immunity there is, for example, with the measles vaccines, in some of these measles mutation there, it seems to be having a 70% lower mortality rate in some of these developing countries that are using that type of measles vaccine. So the idea is that these macrophages have these pattern recognition receptors. So they recognize the features of a damaged cell, and then they basically they train themselves and they pass that memory to the next generation of macrophage that's being made by the body. So this macrophage that's happening there. And the good news is that means that if you have been exposed to some of this vaccination there and you have that natural now memory into your bone marrow, is that as soon as you get exposed, let's say to COVID, you have an immune response to try to do it. And that buys the time to basically get the B and the T cells that takes a little bit longer to be activated. And that may explain why some people get mild and some other people get more severe symptoms. I want to talk again about the aerosol and the droplet because it's all over the news about is it there or is it not there? Yes, it's there. And remember, we talk about the large droplets, which is 100 microns there. These are the ones that it's like a bullet. It's in front of you and or it drops within 6 feet, or you basically get hit in the face and then you touch yourself and unfortunately you get infected. The one we really worry about is the small aerosols, which is less than 3 microns. These are the one that stays in the air. This is like smoke. And if you're in California, you know what I'm talking about, smoke for the last 30 days. These are the ones that can go as far as 26 feet. And so if you look at prior video there, we had a lot of explanation about ventilation. So if you're interested about that, look at the video 2 weeks ago. So why is that important? Data just came out about air travel transmissions. The airline are doing a good job at recycling the air. So there has been 1,600 confirmed COVID-related cases due to COVID. Not in the US. Most of them were international flights. So the amount of time of exposure is critical there. There's a famous case of a flight going from Britain to Vietnam. And most of the people got infected were in business class. So if you're flying in business class and first class, that doesn't protect you there. And you can see that the person who was the index case, as we call it, which is the red person here in 5K, is the one that pretty much spread it to all the people in business class there, but they also spread it to an attendant who therefore spread it to some people in the domestic class there. So they had an attack rate of 62%. That means 62% of the business class who were nearby got infected, unfortunately there. Now remember, this was a very long flight, from the UK to Vietnam. The other bad news is the CDC and the FDA is now coming up to say most of the Chinese made masks called the K95 cannot be relied on. These are the ones you find on Amazon. And so they do not meet the filtration standard of 95% of the submicrons there. ECRI, which is one of the most trusted testing institution in the medical field, has done a study of 200 masks from 15 vendors. And they basically say that 60 to 70% of this mask have poor filtration there. Now, one of the way you could tell that, this mask have what's called these straps. These are the straps that, it's more convenient that goes behind the ear. The traditional N95 have, they have an ear loop. The traditional N95 have straps that you basically tie and you attach behind your head. Now, if you have products from South Korea, they are fine. The problem is the one from China. So do your homework in where you're buying these products and where they're being made. So, so be very aware that you may not be protected. Why is that? Because only half of America is wearing a mask. And you can see California is doing a good job, as well as the Northeast. They got really hit really hard there. So I mean, we've changed our behavior there. And this is the Midwest. Remember what I said earlier? Midwest is having that big upsurge. Guess what? Less than 35% of them are wearing a mask. There's a direct correlation between wearing a mask and having a surge. So please spread the word to your loved ones and your friends, or post this video to your social media. More CDC reversal. I'm getting seasick just watching what's going on in the destruction of the CDC credibility. So if you remember a few weeks ago, the CDC came up under pressure from the White House to say there's no need to test anybody that's asymptomatic, even if they have been exposed. And now the CDC flip-flop and they posted, so this is their quote, that they withdrew that and that all individuals with non-exposure for at least 15 minutes and within 6 feet should be tested. And it was posted by the White House. They had that person there that has been terminated or been put on sick leave without the traditional CDC science review process there. Then we got this whole flip-flop on Monday, September 21st, to say that the CDC had posted that airborne was a problem and everybody should be concerned with airborne. Literally 3 days later, it was withdrawn. And they revert to the prior guidance to say that they still are doing their scientific review. And so, so there has been multiple studies showing that it does spread through small particles in the air. It's very well proven. It's accepted by all the infection disease people I've talked to or that I've listened to. In addition to that, 200 scientists published the letters asking the Public Health Agency to acknowledge airborne transmissions. And airborne transmission means you have to wear a mask and be aware that 6 feet is not protecting you. So the CDC page, if you now go, is basically still not acknowledging that airborne transmission is an issue there. So it unfortunately has been politicized and it has really hurt the credibility of the CDC right now. A study in the UK came out and it talked about that virus mutation that came out of Germany and to give you an idea there, it started in Germany on January the 28th. It went to Scotland in a matter of a month and basically went all the way to the UK. And this gives you an idea. This is this famous 614G spike, which unfortunately is 5 times more contagion, has more spike and is more stable. And it has also a higher viral load. It doesn't mean it has a high mortality and severity. It looks like that's not the case. But you can see how quickly across all the population there, that G, and this is a nice picture of England there, where they show that in March, you still had in green what's called the Chinese mutation that came out to Europe. And then very quickly there, the German mutation there literally took over the world. And so, of course, the big worry is that, can we get another mutation that may affect the effectiveness of vaccine or make it change? The vaccine has mutated multiple times. I think there's over 200 variations I read somewhere. The most dangerous ones was this one, which unfortunately is more virulent in its infection characteristics there. And you can see that if you look at the D versus the G, the mortality is roughly the same. So the mortality has not been affected there, but it is a worry about the infection rate. So in Houston, to go back to the US, they did a similar analysis about doing the D614G mutation. You can see at the beginning, we had that mutation that came out from China and the prior part of Europe. And then it very quickly took over the US. So pretty much the whole US now is fighting this mutation there. And so right now there's over 285 mutation, but this is the leading one. And the mutation is, this is anybody who's into the science there, this is we went from D to the G, and the G is the glycine, which is in the amino acid. This is what's strengthening the spike, and the spike is unfortunately what's connecting to the ACE2 receptors. So let's do a COVID testing there. I think we've talked several times in the past about the need to go away from the Cadillac, which is the PCR, which is very, very sensitive and very specific. So you can see the accuracy rate is really high there, but it takes, unfortunately, days. And because the system has been so overwhelmed, at time it took 14 days, which means it's really irrelevant. By that time, you've infected everybody around you. And so right now we're developing all these new type of testing. Antigen is the new one coming out from Abbott there, where you can do the testing. I don't know if you saw the news that, the airline just announced yesterday that they're flying from the US to Hawaii is not going to do a 15-minute test at the airport, which of course you pay for, which may decrease the quarantine from 14 days to 3 days in Hawaii. And I think this is the type of things you're going to be starting seeing is people doing this rapid testing at the point of care. New therapeutics, there's over 300 therapeutics in phase 3 trials. And I mentioned that because the vaccine, as I'm going to explain, is going to take a long time before most of us in the US by the end of 2021 may be able to get a vaccine that works. What's much more important is that we may have better therapeutics. So if you do get with the disease, we can avoid some of these long hauler problems there if we can understand better why it's happening. And of course, decrease the mortality rate there. So the good news, we have a lot of therapeutics that are now in phase 3 trials. And these are great news. That's not really hitting the press as much. Unfortunately, they're having a hard time enrolling patients because everybody is trying to get these massive trials to get a fast emergency approval there. And so we're now starting to also doing pilots of virtual wards at home where we treat people at home instead of the hospital setting there. So if you look, there's different categories of vaccine, of therapeutics. This is the one we're looking for. These are the ones that are in phase 3 trials, which means they could quickly, maybe by the end of the year, have enough data to maybe get an emergency approval. I want to give you a reality check. Historically, if you look at a drug that in phase 1, they have a 13% chance of getting approved. Good news, if you look at all these drugs that are in phase 3, the 300 candidates, they have a 61% chance. So statistically, there's a high probability we're going to get a lot of new drugs that are basically targeted at COVID, at least at some of the problem that COVID is creating inside the body. So this is to give you an idea. Remdesivir, that you may have heard of, is basically decreasing the length of stay in the hospital setting. It's not a cure for death. It just decreased from the length of stays by 2 or 3 days. But now we start having some very interesting antibody from Eli Lilly that has a significantly higher rate of hospitalization drop, ironically higher remdesivir, and convalescent plasma, which is much more controversial when you talk to the expert there about is it really having an impact on that. The one that has having a massive impact is dexamethasone. This is this cheap existing drugs that's been on the market for a long time, and that's the one that has really saved a lot of lives. And we all know hydroxychloroquine, has not worked out. So let's look at the vaccine. I want to emphasize, because a lot of you have children there, that all the vaccine trials right now are for adults. There is pretty much very little enrollment there in the trials for pediatrics, for kids. And there's several reasons for that. One is that there's a big concern, of course, that there may be a side effects, and so therefore you don't want to give it when it's still unknown what the safety issues are. And also has a high regulatory approval from the FDA. But what that means, there may not be a pediatric vaccine for a long time, like for several years. And how are we going to do that with school reopening, especially if the kids may have asymptomatic, but they could still be carriers. So that's an area there that hasn't really hit the news yet as much. I've did a full review of the vaccine, so please take a look at my video 2 weeks ago, but I'm going to give an update there. To give you an idea, the definition of effectiveness for the FDA is a 50%. That means if you have been vaccinated, it's only effective 50% of the time. So the vaccine doesn't mean you won't get infected. It just means you may have a lower reaction. The same way that when you get the flu, you may still get the flu, but you have a lower reaction to the flu. So just keep that in mind. This is not a silver bullet like we have seen with some of the diseases where for life, you basically like, chickenpox, you get that vaccination pretty much for life, you're pretty much covered. This is not what we're talking about. And you can see some of these vaccines like polio have a 99% effectiveness for a long period of time. What we're talking is to be approved is 50%. It is a low bar. It is a level of the flu vaccine. And it is expected that you may need multiple doses. And that is an issue we'll talk about. So in the new vaccine, and again, go back to my video 2 weeks ago, but we have 34 vaccine in phase 1 to 3 trials. So that's great news. We have the problem of everybody rushing for it. We have the mRNA, the one that, are into the 10 vaccines in the phase 3 trial. So let's do a bit of a deeper dive on some of those. Again, the probabilities, if you phase 3, 65% typically do get approved, but that's typically over several years to get enough safety and efficacy data. And we are in new territory in trying to do this in a much shorter period of time. So I want to talk about CEPI. This is a Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. They are one of the biggest organizations worldwide in funding some of those research. They are funded by 115 countries, and they're covering a third of the world population. It's a global scientific efforts where they're coordinating all the efforts to coordinate the trials and then making sure it's reviewed by independent experts there. So the good news is that the head of that group was saying they haven't met any major hurdles, which makes him optimistic that we're going to get something approved by the first half of 2021. They perceive there may be some efficacy data that may come by the end of 2020 and maybe an early emergency approval there. But based on what we have seen in Russia and China did this early approval there, there's a lot of questions about their data and some of the side effects there. There's a perception that a known vaccine science, which is a deactivated virus, may be the one that may have started and maybe slightly behind, but maybe the winner over the long term. And that's just because we know that they have long-term impact on the antibodies, and we know how to make them in a cost-effective way, and we know how to deliver them in an effective way. So there's a lot of manufacturing delivery challenges in the mRNA with the ultra cold supply chain at minus 80 degrees Celsius there. So the perception is that we may need a cocktail, a basket of vaccine that may be effective for some people, better than for other ones. And so the big concern that we have is the logistics on how do you bring it to people there when, for example, the mRNA may only be good for a few weeks or a short period of time after you thawed, and it has to be shipped at this ultra cool temperature. There's not enough of those freezer in the US to keep that old temperature there. We know we did it with Ebola, but we only did 250,000 for Ebola. We're talking billions of doses. There's a concern with what's called the vector type of vaccine. And the problem with this vector type of vaccine is that in certain cases, like dengue fever, there you start getting a reaction the more of this vaccine injection you get. So if you think about the flu vaccine, we get a flu vaccine once a year, but in some of these vaccines, based on how they make it there, you're getting a more and more immune system response to it that could create a bigger problem there. So we need to keep an eye on that, because when they're talking about that silver shot, this is something we may have to take for multiple years until we control that disease. So over the long term, the attenuated live vaccine, which is the J&J and some of these other types, or even ironically the Chinese, may be the long-term winners there because they know how to manufacture in large scales. We know they provide longer immunity, and we may be able to deliver instead of an injection by nasal and oral delivery there. And so the key thing I think I want to get across, this is not a single silver bullet. You get injected once and you don't have to worry for the rest of your life. This is something like the flu vaccine you're going to have to do on a regular basis. So what's the status? You can see in the phase 3, that's the one we really want to see with Moderna. I'll talk more about that. And that's in the US and CEPI and Operation Warp Speed, how about most of the capacity of that vaccine for this year there. Pfizer, BioNTech, again, please go back to the video 2 weeks ago for more details there. And AstraZeneca are the big one. And then there's a lot of issues with the Chinese one. They're using an inactivated vaccine, which is, high volume, low cost, and we have long-term impacts. But the safety data right now isn't clear enough, how effective it is there. So there's, as a result of that, a lot of safety concerns. The researchers came out in the US saying that in May, 72% of Americans were willing to take the vaccine, and now it has dropped to 51%. And the concern is that they expect that the vaccine will be approved before there's enough safety and efficacy data to really be sure that it's safe. And as a result of that, 90 health organizations have issued an open letter to the FDA to make sure that the FDA is very rigorous in reviewing phase 3 trials before approving this. And so for the safety data, normally the safety data is on 60,000 patients for a long period of time. Another group of Black physicians have created their own group, and they've created their own independent expert panel. There's a concern that there's not enough minorities that have been exposed to these safety trials, and there's also a concern that the data is not going to be reviewing the scientific basis, maybe be influenced by the politics, and we already know in Russia and China has been the case. So they have decided to set up their own a review of the data before they recommend to the Black population to be vaccinated. So we're going to see a lot of dysfunction in trusting the data. So this is a lot of concern about side effects. And if you think about it, if you have a 2% side effects, that may be worse than what the virus is doing. So lots of question mark on the vaccine safety issues. Moderna is doing a great job at enrolling. To give you an idea, they're already at 26,000 out of the 30,000 they're planning to enroll. They're trying to have diversity in the pool. So you can see there's 16% of Hispanic. They have a low percent on the Black population there. It's only 7% there, and majority is white population there. They will start the pediatric trials in 2021, which means it's not going to be approved until 2022, probably, depending when they started. They expect in the best case to have, and I say the best case, interim data, efficacy data in November and December. And I says, and that's going to be reviewed by an independent safety board. They emphasize that the target they're trying to hit is 50%. And what they may discover, there may be some subgroups where it works better than other people. And that's something that's starting to emerge, is that some of these vaccines work better on younger than the elderly. And that, so there may be a different vaccine for different age groups. They are delivering their trials based on the infection rate of the zip code. So they're tracking the zip code. And right now they're focusing on the Midwest and the Southern state because that's where we have the highest infection rate. They think they can do 20 million doses. Now remember, 20 million doses, we need 2 doses 28 days apart. That's only 10 million people in the US, and that's going to go to all the healthcare workers. And they believe they could go to 500 million doses, and they have a problem accessing the raw materials to get to 1 billion doses for next year. Pfizer is showing early data that looks at they're having good antibodies in the adult, but it drops by 60% with the elderly. So what we're going to start to see is that depending of your pre-existing condition, your age group, some vaccine may be better than others as they're starting to look at the subgroup data. J&J, for example, seems to have very good efficacy with a younger population, so 1-dose injections there, while AstraZeneca and Moderna are 2 doses. So you're going to start seeing, as we're learning more, that a different vaccine are going to hit different subsegments. Well, let's talk about the population. This is a graphic that shows the capacity that people are building in billions of doses. Keep in mind that some of those vaccine needs 2 doses, so you have to divide by 2. So if you're talking 2 billion doses for AstraZeneca, that's a billion people there. That's assuming we can deliver that to those population there. And there was an announcement today of another organization in Europe that rich countries are subsidizing the cost to deliver to poor countries in Europe and in the rest of the world. The 2 countries not participating is the US and China. So AstraZeneca, maybe not the first one, maybe Moderna is going to be approved a bit earlier there, but they have a capacity just because they're working with AstraZeneca and University of Oxford there. This is the one that was put on hold. If you look at the news 2 weeks ago, when people had some severe problem with the spinal cord. So we need to keep an eye on that to make sure that's not a serious complication there, because that would be a very serious concern. But they give you an idea. I think J&J, a lot of people think that J&J may be the dark horse, but also, they take a bit longer there because of the technology they're using there, that they may be the one that scale up and has the bigger impact. So lots of data needs to come out. Some positive news, it turns out that dogs have 100% sensitivity in detecting the virus. Not only that, but they can detect it 5 days before the onset of symptoms. So they can detect it before the PCR can detect it. And we talked about a couple of videos again that it's happening in several parts of Europe and Australia, but now Helsinki is deploying them at the airport. They already have 5 dogs that have been trained. They're going to expand it to 20 dogs. It's much easier than some of the one we saw in Australia there. In this case, you just rub your skin with a wipe and you drop the wipe in a cup. And then the dog will sniff the cup so it doesn't get exposed directly to the patient there. And the reason is because the nose, if any of you has a dog like we do, they can detect 10 molecules concentration level. To give you an idea, the human test of the PCR need 18 million molecules. So they're ultra sensitive. That's why they're able to test it before you have any symptoms, probably very shortly after you've been infected there. And that's because they have 220 million scent receptor versus porous humans at 5 million there. So I wanted to finish on this up note there. Please wear a mask. They did in 2018, and we should be able to do it as in 1918. We should be able to do it in 2020. So see you in 2 weeks. Thank you for listening, and please look at my first video on epidemiology. A lot of things happening in the US, like an uptick. So stay healthy and please wear a mask and tell your friends and post this video to your friends. Thank you.